Good evening and welcome to Evenings of History. For those of you for whom this is your first visit tonight, I just want to point out, as I've done many other evenings, by joining the Ouray County Historical Society, you can get into these Evenings of History free. Plus you get a reduced cost on our books at our bookstore, as well as the gifts at our bookstore. So think about becoming a member if you haven't. And our remaining Evening of History slate for this summer is all on our website. So on to the show. We are really lucky this evening to have two speakers. Last week you got, what, 4 or 5. Today you get 2. And it's going to be really exciting because both of these gentlemen have a true genetic relationship to one of the more notable figures in Ouray's history, that being Thomas Walsh. Keith Mulhern, originally from Belfast, Northern Ireland, immigrated to the United States in 2011. Through genealogic research, he found out that he's the great-great-grandson of Thomas Walsh. Further research led him to uncover more of his Irish origins of the Walsh family and their ultimate journey to America, and how once arriving in America, it shaped the lives of those and others in Ouray County. Keith is an avid road cyclist and works currently as an engineer in the Pacific Northwest. But that's not all. Secondly, we have another gentleman related to Thomas Walsh. Michael Peddecord is the great-great-grandson of Thomas Walsh. Michael was raised in Craig, Colorado, where his Irish immigrant grandparents owned the M.H. Murphy Ranch. Michael will talk about the historical events that shaped the lives of his grandmother, May Walsh Hennessy Murphy, and how the poverty of post-famine Ireland affected many of the Irish immigrants and miners who ultimately found their way to Colorado in places like Cripple Creek and Victor. Besides being an avid history buff and skier and traveler, Mike is also an emeritus professor at San Diego State University. So please welcome, first of all, Keith.
There we go. We've already acknowledged Maria. Thank you so much. You've heard the connection story. I wouldn't be here without your connectedness. Thank you so much. Keith, thank you, my newfound cousin. What a great opportunity to re-stimulate my interest in genealogy and start learning a whole heck of a lot about Thomas K. Walsh, at least as much as we could. Thomas K. Walsh was my great-great-grandfather, more than just a guy on a family tree now, certainly. My grandmother is going to be the key or thread around our story here about Thomas K. May Walsh Hennessy Murphy, she's my maternal grandmother. We're going to say a little bit more about Thomas Francis Walsh, his son, and the gift, and how that changed the course of my grandmother and my grandfather's, indeed, my own life. I want to acknowledge my mom. She died too young. I got a lot of the stories from her and my cousin Patsy Murphy. Thank you so much. I wish I could have gotten some more of those. And of course, we couldn't do this without our historical records, particularly the Colorado historical newspapers have been a great source, as Keith mentioned, to corroborate some of the other information we have. I have a list of references. I'm going to refer into some books and so forth, and I have a copy of that if anybody's interested at the end of this. Okay, so who was Thomas K. Walsh? Thomas K. Walsh occupies an important but often overlooked part of our Walsh family history. While his son, Thomas Francis, became a Colorado mining magnate, Thomas K. was the family patriarch whose decision to leave Ireland changed the course of generations. This is where Thomas Walsh was born, in County Tipperary in South Central Ireland. A main feature of Tipperary is the Rock of Cashel, and it's in the middle of Cashel there. This is the former high seats of the kings of Munster, one of the 4 traditional Gaelic kingdoms of Ireland that you saw on Keith's slide also. The area around Cashel, where Thomas and my grandmother were born, is a farming area. You can see on the lower left is a church where my great-grandparents were married, and on the right where they're buried, that's one of my other Irish cousins. And a beautiful part of the country. It's now famous also for horse breeding. Unfortunately, we know very few details about the life of Thomas K. Walsh and his time here in Colorado. But what we do know, a lot of that survives because of the memoir of his memoir from Evelyn Walsh McLean, Thomas F. Walsh's daughter. Another great source, if you haven't already looked at it, or if you're interested in Thomas F. Walsh, is a biography done by John Stewart. Both of these books, of course, are available in the museum bookstore. Like so many other Irish of the post-famine time, Thomas K. and his 4 children immigrated to Colorado. Thomas came in about 1869, along with his son Thomas Francis and the daughter Marie, who would later marry Arthur Lafferty, an Irish immigrant and a lawman in Leadville. 2 sons of Michael and Patrick arrived later, we believe, in the 1870s. Thomas, as Keith mentioned, fathered a total of 12 children by 2 of the wives, 8 of which remained in Ireland. Now here is you'll be tested on this at the end of the presentation. This traces the remarkable expansion of the family fortunes of the Walshes here in Colorado, and as well as beyond into Washington, D.C. The black items show factoids for Francis, Thomas F., as he moved around and worked his way through the mining industry. The blue are the ones that we know about for friend Thomas K. We have relatively little data for the patriarch. We have a 1880 census record placing him on a ranch in southern Colorado, but we actually haven't been able to find an actual death certificate. The evidence we have for his death comes from an obituary of his daughter, Maria Walsh Lafferty, and places his death in 1883 in Denver. The blue relates to my grandmother, and I'll be expanding on that more later, including the gift. Well, now we're turning to the amazing legacy of my grandmother. And May Walsh Hennessy Murphy was born in County Tipperary. You see her baptismal certificate as well as her official birth record. Here are some facts in her early life. She is born 1874. Her mother, the Walsh daughter, is 17, marries my great-great-grandfather, Martin Hennessy, age 32. There are 4 kids, 3 other siblings, 2 brothers, and a sister, Margaret, who was born 4 years later. Things sort of come unraveled in 1882 when the father, Martin, dies at age 39, and 4 months later, her mother dies of pneumonia at age 25. So my grandmother is orphaned at the age of 7. What we understand, of course, she was raised by the Walsh family in Ireland. Well, about 1882, she's about 18, and she probably has funding from Thomas Francis Walsh, and she immigrates to Colorado. She never meets her grandfather, Thomas K., who dies before she arrives in Denver in 1883. She has a younger sister who immigrates, Margaret, probably 4 years later. We believe that both May and her sister lived with Marie Lafferty in Denver for some time. And at some point she moves to the Cripple Creek Mining District. But on the right you can see what's going on in Colorado at the time. We have a growing community of Irish immigrants in Denver as well as all the other mining towns. Denver gets its first Catholic church. It's a boom and bust time for the mining and silver industry. And also it's the start of the unrest and the unionization of miners. Like thousands of Irish immigrants may enter a society where the immigrants did a lot of the heavy lifting, but they also faced the prejudice of nativism. Well, when May moved to Cripple Creek in Victor, she probably didn't know she was moving herself into a virtual war zone, the mine wars. I want to provide a little background about the Colorado mine wars. Unrest started in the 1880s in the gold and silver mines and later spread to the coal mines. Most of the major mining towns that you see here on the map had labor disputes. It was not only in the mining towns, but also in small mills and smelters as far away as Denver. The Colorado labor wars of 1903 and 1904 were among the most dramatic labor conflicts in American history. Workers sought fair wages, safer conditions, and union recognition. The mine owners and the state authorities often responded with force in the form of the Colorado National Guard, creating a conflict that drew national attention. The map shows the towns where the unrest occurred. On the upper right is a historic photograph of the town of Victor. And in that time period, about 1900, the Cripple Creek Mining District, which included Victor, had about 50,000 people. On the bottom right is a National Guard camp in 1903. So basically, it's a war between the unions and the National Guard, the Colorado National Guard. The governor Peabody was working with Mine Owners Association. He called up the Colorado National Guard. The mine owners funded the deployments. The conflict escalated into martial law, which the governor declared in 1903 and at times in 1904. At its peak, there were up to 3,000 guardsmen in the mining district. On the left is a Union poster of the time asking questions about the occupation and the deportations. Newspapers and labor publications accused state authorities of suspending civil rights, imprisoning union members, and deporting them via train to Kansas. The photograph on the lower left is from a book by George Suggs, published in 1972, Colorado's War on Militant Unionism. The photograph on the lower right is from that book, and it shows the National Guard, the Colorado Guard, rounding up union miners, taking them to what were called the bullpens, where they were going to be placed on boxcars. The Guard would carry out deportations of union men on a large scale. The best evidence is that about 250 were shipped in boxcars to the Kansas state line and told, "Don't come back." Of course, most of the miners would eventually return to their families. Of course, for families like the Murphys, these events were not abstract political disturbances. They were deeply personal struggles affecting livelihoods and safety. More about the Murphys in that point in time. So May moves to Victor in about 1894. She marries Michael Henry Murphy, who's a miner from Cork. They have two sons. My uncles, Thomas Frank and John. In about 1900, Michael joins the union, the Western Federation of Miners, and in 1902 he becomes a U.S. citizen. In 1904, according to our family stories, he is deported to Kansas in a boxcar. Of course, he returns home, but by the time he returned home, the union effectively had been busted. So for May, these years must have been filled with uncertainty. She was raising young children while her husband Michael faced economic hardship and political oppression. Yet the family endured. This is a blow-up. On the left is my grandfather's, Michael Henry Murphy's naturalization certificate. Pretty nice piece of documentation here. On the right, I've blown up just part of that, because this is where he renounces allegiance to the then King of England, which I don't think was hard to do for Irish immigrants at the time. Okay, so what's the big question in the Murphy household is, how do we get out of the mines? Well, we have a stroke of family support and Irish luck. In about 1908, about the same time Thomas F. Walsh, May's uncle, was selling the Camp Bird mine and resettling in Washington, D.C., the Murphys are given funds to buy a ranch near Craig. This decision fundamentally changed the family's future. Moving from a volatile mining economy to a ranch offered security, land ownership, and opportunities. Okay. So this is a historical map of Craig. You can see the Murphy, it's circled there. It's a ranch, small ranch, dairy cattle on the Yampa River. There's the Murphy brand from a brand book in 1936. This is a more modern Google map showing the location just south of Craig and on the Yampa River. And you can see part of the ranch was later sold for the Craig water plant. So what is Craig like? Well, I'm not sure why the Murphys picked Craig for their next chapter. Obviously, it was a long way from the mines, which was a good idea, I guess. But I think they must have anticipated that Craig would grow and prosper, and in fact, they were right. You can see some of the main events for Craig on the left. The railroad arrives, and that's a really big deal for a town. The growing town of Craig needs a water plant, and they purchased part of the Murphy Ranch, because on the river obviously was the best spot for that. Craig goes through a Prohibition, an oil boom, refineries built there. Overall, eventually after the Depression, eventually the refinery closes, and things are cycling, particularly in a mineral-based industry. There's a boom and bust. Then coal booms, oil booms, wool booms, uranium booms, electric power generation booms. That's the history of Craig, and it continues to the present day. On the right are some events affecting the family. Obviously, we've got to Craig, the birth of my mom, Helen. And I'm going to talk more about the Ku Klux Klan burning a cross. But eventually they sold the ranch, moved to Denver, and eventually moved back to Craig. So before the cross burning story, here's some information and background about the Ku Klux Klan in Colorado. Now, I won't take a show of hands, but it's not something I learned about in high school. I would have thought that the Klan was something that was in the South. Not true. A lot of Klan activity. This is a summary of a book by Robert Goldberg, published in 1977, talking about the Klan in Colorado's Hooded Empire. The 1920s was an era of prohibition, rising crime, and many saw a need for law and order. And this is where the Klan stepped in to fill some of that void. Unlike the Reconstruction era Klan of the South, Colorado's Klan focused as portraying itself as defending 100% Americanism and being the champion of law and order during the crime-ridden Prohibition era. Through churches, civic organizations, political campaigns, the Klan successfully expanded its membership and influence throughout Colorado. The Colorado Klan was far from a clandestine organization. Estimates are that at its peak, the Klan had 50 to 100,000 members. This is pretty impressive since the population of Colorado in 1920 was 900,000. The Klan built membership by infiltrating both Republican and Democratic parties throughout the state. They also, what made the Klan unique in Colorado was, in addition to the law and order and sort of the racist agenda, they included a populist agenda which promised women's rights and labor protections. The Klan goal was to elect members and supportive candidates to all levels of government. And they succeeded. After the 1924 election, Klan members controlled the governor's office, a U.S. Senate seat, and both houses of the Colorado legislature. There's an excellent YouTube documentary available on YouTube from Colorado Public Television, and I have that on the references that I have available. Since Colorado had a very small black population, the Klan directed much of its ire toward Catholics, Hispanics, and a small number of Jews. For Irish immigrant families like the Murphys, these developments meant prejudice had been institutionalized at all levels of government. Now, this wasn't confined to Denver and the Eastern Slope. These are factoids from an excellent summary of the Ku Klux Klan in Moffat County, and published in the Craig Daily Press in 2019. You can see some of the activities that the Klan was engaged in the Craig area. Burning a cross on the sand rocks, rallies. The Klan rhetoric emphasized Protestant supremacy, anti-Catholic sentiment, and true Americanism. You see some of the numbers here, 2,500 and 1,500. Well, these are particularly impressive because the population of Craig is about 1,300, as is Steamboat Springs at the time. Moffat County has 5,000 people, and Round County has 9,000. So you can see there was a lot going on here. Kind of interesting, but I won't take a show of hands, but I don't know how many people got this in history. I certainly did. For the Irish Catholic families like the Murphys, these events served as public reminders that many of their neighbors viewed them as outsiders, despite years of participation in the local economy. This is a picture of the Murphy house on the ranch. According to family recollections, the cross burning took place at the Murphy Ranch during the height of Klan activity in the region in the mid-1920s. I suspect that the cross burning was a one-time event, but it left a lasting impression. Whether intended for intimidation, warning, the event illustrates how a racist political movement could directly affect ordinary families. For the Murphys, the Irish Catholic immigrants, who had overcome poverty, orphanhood, and other hardships, the sight of a burning cross represented a painful reminder that prejudice still remained in America. For my mom, then a teenager, just knowing that some of the folks you went to school with, some of the people you were doing business with were in the Klan, and some of them were dressed up in hoods and burning crosses. I wonder how long it took for these memories to fade from my grandparents and my mother's memories. Well, fortunately, the Klan's political influence and popularity in Colorado were short-lived. The Klan faded away quickly following internal disputes and conflicts among Klan leadership, and the end of Prohibition, the drop in crime, and the fact that the Depression began to claim most people's energy, and that was sort of the end of the Klan, thank goodness. No more cross burning. Well, these photographs connect the past and the present. The buildings shown here are the remnants of the Murphy Ranch taken in the early 2000s. And the agricultural landscape. But it also shows, this is on the lower right there, the transition of Moffat County and Craig into a mineral-based economy. And you see these are the emission plumes from the Craig Station, which is south of the Murphy Ranch. So now it's time to bring the story to a close. These are the best photos that I have of my grandparents on the left. My grandma May and my grandpa Mike. Their faces reflect lives shaped by childhood poverty, immigration, mining, labor struggles, ranching, but they also show family resistance and resilience. The images remind us that ultimately this is about people and decisions that often affect future generations. They both died when I'm young, and of course, I hope they're the first people. When enough, I get to heaven. Now, to close this back in Ouray, full circle. It's great to be a part of this proud Walsh legacy. We see the Walsh legacy in the local buildings and the other contributions to our town here from our famous relative, Thomas Francis Walsh. More importantly, the Walsh legacy survives not only through famous mines, public buildings, and wealth, but through the descendants like Keith and myself, who continue to explore and preserve our family history. For my part, I endeavor to help my family connect with the legacy, and you see here a picture of my grandson Ryan with the Welsh bell. The story of Thomas K. Walsh is therefore not simply a story about one man. It's a story of generations connected by kinship, migration, sacrifice, and opportunity. This transformed opportunity into extraordinary success. Yet perhaps the family's greatest achievement is not measured in gold or wealth, it's measured in support extended across generations. That support reached an orphan girl in Ireland, helped bring her to a new life in America, and carried her away, along with her husband, from the hardships of mining in the Cripple Creek to a ranch in northwestern Colorado. So the veins beneath the rock are not merely veins of gold. They're family ties that connect Tipperary to Denver, Denver to Cripple Creek to Craig, and Ouray to Washington, and one generation to the next. Through those connections, Thomas K. Walsh's legacy lives on, not only in minds and fortunes, but more importantly, in the lives of the families he helped shape. It's been a privilege to share some family stories and historical facts. Thank you very much.
Thank you.